Warning: 50 States, 50 Murders is a podcast based around true crime. Please be advised of the horrific details of murder, abuse, and sexual assault, occasional adult language, as well as brief humor. Buckle up and enjoy the ride.
A quiet college town, 4 young lives taken in the middle of the night.
And decades earlier, an isolated cabin, a government standoff, and the spark that helped ignite a movement.
This week we head to the land of mountains, militia, and mystery, Idaho. Welcome back to 50 States, 50 Murders. I'm AJ.
And I'm Sarah. This is the podcast taking you, the listener, on an auditory road trip across all 50 states,
While we discuss 50 different murders.
Thank you for tuning in to Season 2, Episode 30.
And today we're covering state number 30, Idaho, known for its wild beauty and deep wilderness. But this week, we're digging into the darkness that's lurked behind its pine-covered hills.
All right, let's start off with a few facts that make Idaho stand out. First off, Idaho produces more than 1/3 of the U.S.'s potatoes. Not really a shock there, but it's still wild to realize just how many French fries probably trace back to this state.
And it's not just potatoes. Idaho is also home to Shoshone Falls, which is actually taller than Niagara Falls. Locals call it the Niagara of the West.
Also, Idaho is one of the most active states in the country for earthquakes. It sits along the western edge of the Intermountain Seismic Belt.
And finally, a little bit of trivia for us. We talk about state seals, state flags. Idaho's state seal is the only state seal designed by a woman, Emma Edwards Green, created back in 1891.
I love it already.
Yeah, I like it. It's pretty cool. Pretty cool seal. We'll throw it on the TikTok as always, but it's busy. There's definitely a lot going on, but yeah, I like it. So Idaho might be famous for its mountains and potatoes, but it's also got some laws that are just honestly strange. Still on the books and still technically real.
And these aren't your average speeding tickets. These are the kinds of laws that make you go, wait, what?
Huh?
Number 1, you can actually go to jail for selling a damaged potato as an Idaho Deluxe.
Okay, so these guys take their potatoes seriously. They're the number one producer, and don't try coming up here and pawning off some legit Idaho Deluxe if it ain't Idaho Deluxe. That's not how they do it. So they don't mess around with their spuds. If you try to pass off a rough-looking potato as a premium, that is a misdemeanor, and it can get you 6 months in jail. No joke. Number 2, you cannot fish while riding a camel or a giraffe.
So apparently this needed to be clarified. Idaho law says it's illegal to fish from the back of a camel or giraffe. So maybe we just stick to a boat like the rest of us.
Yeah, interesting. I wonder if fishing from the back of a camel or giraffe, I wonder if that gives you an advantage. Like, am I just pulling in way more fish than the average guy?
I don't know.
Maybe they're like, okay, you are getting way too many fish. You're clearing out the lake. We can no longer be fishing off camels or giraffes.
I'm wondering if like the camel or the giraffe are walking in the water, because maybe that's like disturbing.
True, it's disturbing.
Something, but
You're
other
getting
than that, I just don't know what would really be the harm. I don't think that they're going to catch more fish, you know. a hump of a camel's back, but you never know.
Very interesting. So finally, our last unique law for Idaho. We talked about snakes in Louisiana. We're going to go back to snakes here. Snake bites on Sundays are illegal unless it's snowing. Don't get bit by a snake on Sunday unless it's snowing. We don't make the rules. We just report them. If a snake bites you on a Sunday in Idaho, that's illegal unless it's snowing. Somehow, snow just seems to make it okay.
So you can't say Idaho isn't memorable.
All right, now let's move on from weird legal rules to some actual spots that are worth visiting in the Gem State.
So if you're brave enough to visit Idaho after this episode, don't worry. It's not all crime scenes and conspiracy cabins. There's actually a ton to see and do here.
So first up, something I already mentioned, we have Shoshone Falls. Mentioned earlier, but it's definitely worth the repeat. It's taller than Niagara, right here in Twin Falls. Honestly, I've actually never even heard of this waterfall prior to researching. And looking at pictures, it really looks beautiful. And it's one of those places that make you feel tiny in the best way possible.
Next up, Craters of the Moon National Monument. Literal lava fields that look like the surface of another planet. Perfect for hiking and if you want to feel like you're on Mars without the spacesuit, this is your spot.
This one looked kind of cool. It kind of reminded me of like Interstellar.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like a place where you would film that movie at. So that's cool. I mean, especially if you're into hiking, something a little different. And if you're into cozy mountain towns with a touch of glam, Sun Valley is where it's at. This is a place where celebs go there to ski, but it's also amazing in the summer for hiking and biking. Threw another picture in there. We'll throw that on our TikTok. Honestly, just a really pretty town.
We also have to shout out Coeur d'Alene. Beautiful lake, charming downtown, and if you're into golf, like my co-host AJ, they have a floating green. Yes, literally floating.
Yeah, checking this place out. Again, a place I've never heard of, so apologies to Idaho. I guess I was not familiar with your guys' game. But, yeah, this looks pretty cool. I enjoy golf. And floating green, so you have to, if I'm looking at it right, you have to be taken out to the green by boat.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty cool. I'd have to imagine that's probably a pretty pricey golf course, but I think that's pretty cool. And then, of course, last but not least, let's bring it around. If you're a fan of the Bazaar, you can also head to the Idaho Potato Museum in Blackfoot. Come for the world's largest potato chip. Stay for giant potato stuff. When you go on road trips, have you ever been a person to like stop at like the roadside attractions?
Yes.
Have you? I've never done it.
I am, and unfortunately, like I said before, sometimes I travel for work.
Sure.
So I was actually driving. This was late last year, maybe fall. Maybe actually earlier this year, sometime recently in the past 6 months. And I was driving in Kentucky.
All right.
And just me by myself, checking out multiple malls and stores. And I kept seeing this billboard for, I forget, Australia Down Under, or like something about Kentucky Down Under.
Kentucky Down Under, okay. Something
like that. And I can't remember. It was not Kentucky, but it was something down under. And it was located in Kentucky.
Okay.
And it was like a kangaroo farm.
Oh, okay.
And it kept saying, like, come pet the kangaroos. And I've been on the wrong side of TikTok lately because I've been seeing a lot of, like, kangaroos on 2 feet, like, with huge muscles.
And they're, like, trying to draw the dogs into
the
water.
Yeah, so they were kind of scary, but I was like, I want to do it.
Yeah.
So, like, I pulled over to the side. Like, I literally pulled over on that exit and went through the whole thing, but then I realized that it was more of like a family attraction, and you had to have like a golf cart to get to the kangaroos. You couldn't just like pull up. So it was like almost an all day experience, kind of like a zoo. So I just took pictures of it, and I was like, I'm taking Emmy here one day.
Yeah, close enough. Cool.
But yeah, those billboards and, random signs on the side of the road, like Grandpa's Cheese Barn that you see when you're driving, I'm like, we're stopping.
Okay, so if you are a listener of 50 States, 50 Murders, which we know you are, and we appreciate that, we kind of have a general script that we like to follow. And before we dive into our own main case of the week, I like to find like 3 either infamous murderers or 3 infamous murder cases. and just do like a really shallow dive into those 3 cases. But this week for Idaho, it was a specific case that just happened, 2022, and I thought it was so unique that I wanted to do a medium dive on the University of Idaho student murders, and then we'll do our deep dive. So instead of 3, we're just going to do 1. Before we get into our main case, we have to talk about the murders that brought national attention to the quiet college town of Moscow, Idaho.
So in November of 2022, the town was rocked by a crime so brutal it made headlines across the world. 4 University of Idaho students were stabbed to death in their sleep inside of their off-campus rental home.
The victims were Ethan Chapin, Xana Kernoldy, Madison Mogan, and Kaylee Goncalves. Again, staying with theme to the 50 States, 50 Murders. We love our hard-to-pronounce victims/murderers. Hopefully I hit all those on the head. All of them in their early 20s, friends, roommates, people with their whole lives ahead of them.
What made this so chilling, aside from the fact that it was 4 victims, is that the house had no sign of forced entry. 2 other roommates were also home at the time, and they were left unharmed.
The timeline of this case was tight. The murders happened somewhere between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. The suspect entered the house, attacked the victims, some believed to be sleeping, and was then gone within minutes.
The investigation was massive. There were over 20,000 tips, 300 interviews, and intense media scrutiny. The internet basically turned into a crime forum overnight. TikTok especially.
TikTok was crazy. I remember like mini doc, the theories. It was so crazy because it was such a gruesome crime, but there was like no signs of breaking and entering, like you said. No real. Yeah, it was crazy. And then I just think to myself, like, obviously tips, interviews, the more the better, but at some point, like, maybe not. At some point, there has to be a limit.
You have too much.
20,000 tips is crazy.
Yeah, I think also it was just insane that there were 2 victims, or I should say like 2 survivors.
Yeah, just chilling.
Of the attack that were essentially in the next room. I mean, I think that kind of caught everybody's attention too, that it wasn't just like everybody in the house was murdered.
Yeah.
There were also two girls who were left unharmed. So I think that raised a lot of questions, and a lot of people...
Maybe involvement, potentially. Yeah, because it would be weird to... well, I don't know if weird's the right word. It would be surreal to just be sleeping and you wake up and...
Well, yeah, and they weren't sleeping, though. The girls were texting each other.
Okay.
That were surviving. They had texted each other, and then they ended up together, and then they didn't call police for a very long time afterwards. They called a lot of their other friends and they didn't know what happened. There was just a lot of, like I said, conspiracies. This is all allegedly. This is all things we've learned from the internet or documentaries or reading the case itself. So it's definitely interesting, but I think that's what, like, all the questions surrounding the case definitely drew a lot of attention.
Eventually, the break came from an unusual place, a knife cover found near one of the bodies. It had DNA on the snap button, and through genealogy tracing, they matched it to Brian Koberger.
He was a criminology PhD student at Washington State University, just 8 miles from Moscow. His background in criminal behavior made it even more disturbing.
Just a quick pause here. So I'm assuming genealogy tracing. So this guy must have done like a 23andMe or Ancestor DNA or something like that.
Ancestor, yeah.
Just really interesting that I've never done one of those before. And I mean, not like that anyone knows of. Not like I'm a serial killer and I have something to hide. But it's crazy to think that you could sign up for something like that and they're allowed to use that information. But nonetheless, I've heard of a couple different cases now where people have been traced back through DNA submitted at their own will.
Or submitted from their siblings
Yeah.
or parents or
Yeah.
somebody with that shared their DNA.
Yeah, so like even if I didn't do it, but my sister did it, yeah, it could still be.
It could trace back to that.
Yeah.
So maybe he necessarily didn't, but it could have been somebody in his family.
Yeah, that's just so crazy. I'm almost kind of in a way surprised, like legally you're allowed to use that, but
You probably, I can almost guarantee when you sign up to do that
There's gotta be,
online,
like,
there's got to be
disclaimers.
some things that you're signing that are legally
and, like,
allowing them to do that.
the 30
Absolutely.
pages of
Mhm.
terms and conditions.
Yeah, that you just kind of skip over.
Yeah.
You're definitely signing away your rights to that.
So he was arrested in Pennsylvania at his parents' house in December of 2022 and later charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. He's pleaded not guilty, and his trial is set to begin in August of 2025 in Boise, Idaho.
So, like I said, there's still so many unanswered questions. Motive, for one. He didn't know the victims, at least not in any way that's been made public.
Yeah, and I think that was another just really huge reason why this case was it was already blowing up. But then you have this guy who doesn't technically break in. He just walks in, but then he kind of like decides to kill 4 of the 6 and leave the other 2, but he has no connections to them whatsoever. So just yeah, the case it just shocked people because it didn't feel random, but it's kind of how it seemed. So, you know, someone choosing a house, entering silently, committing something that awful, and then almost getting away with it.
Right. It seemed crazy how brutal it was as well to those 4
It definitely
victims.
felt personal.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And obviously, it rattled a community that once felt safe. Parents pulled students out of school. People started locking their doors in a town where they had never done that before.
Now, we're not going to dive into the full court proceedings here. That'll come later when more is revealed. Maybe, future seasons down the road when we come back
Follow-up
to Idaho. I would definitely like to follow up with this. But I just feel like we couldn't talk about Idaho without acknowledging this specific case. It's fresh, it's raw, and it's still ongoing to this day.
And for the friends and families of those 4 students, that nightmare still hasn't ended yet.
Yeah, crazy case. I'm sure if you are a crime fan, or even if you're not a crime fan, I feel like this is one where everyone's familiar with. So I think we're all interested in kind of seeing how this plays out. Again, August 2025, a couple months. And hopefully we kind of learn some more information.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine that as like the parent that it makes it any easier. But at the same time, I have to feel like it's got to bring some sort of like peace knowing like why. Like, I don't know.
Or knowing exactly what happened.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I know there are a lot of theories as well that maybe he wasn't
Okay.
the person who did it, which I think is very unlikely given the evidence they have against him. However, that is a theory that's out there.
Yeah.
So I think just some kind of answers.
Yeah. I know it's not going to bring my child back, but like just the piece of any information whatsoever, just knowing something. I have to imagine like going to bed every night knowing that it was just random.
For 3 years.
Yeah, that'd be tough.
Almost by the time the case is.
So transitioning from our medium dive of the University of Idaho students, we're going to transition into our main case of the week. And as we know by now, Idaho is no stranger to the wilderness. But in 1992, one off-the-grid family took isolation to the entire next level. And what followed turned into one of the most infamous federal standoffs in U.S. history.
Today, we're talking about Ruby Ridge, a remote mountaintop in Boundary County, not far from the Canadian border. And this wasn't your typical true crime. It was a clash between a family and the U.S. government, and it ended in blood.
Our story starts with Randy Weaver. He was a former Green Beret, devout Christian, and staunch anti-government survivalist. In the mid-1980s, he and his wife Vicky moved their growing family to northern Idaho to escape what they believed was a corrupt society. So watching a little documentary, we learned that they were originally from the state of Iowa, a state that we covered not too long ago. And for whatever reason, at this time, legally, you were not allowed to homeschool your children. So they decided, big government, we got to get out of here, live off grid. Randy and Vicky had 4 children. Sarah was their oldest. Then they had Samuel, Rachel, and they also had their infant daughter, Elishaba.
And we're talking fully off the grid, a handmade cabin with no electricity and firearms for protection. But while the Weavers kept mostly to themselves, Randy's growing ties to white supremacist groups drew the attention of federal authorities.
This is like a little mini discussion that we got into while we were watching this documentary, because I had made the comment, again, I am the last person in this world. If you know me, I'm not a quote-unquote survivalist. My odds of lasting long would probably not be great, but I do, in a world where I could do it, I think living off the grid would really be awesome. And I think you kind of said you disagreed with me on that. You don't think you could do the off the grid?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't know. I think the transition would be very tough. The transition to off the grid, and then, like, is that a lifetime thing?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I was like, because if it's not your lifelong goal, then I think the transition back, especially for children, would be, like, extremely difficult.
Yeah, I'm not sure that there's any coming back once you decide, like, this is the route we're going. But I do think if you can pull it off, that's the trick. If you can pull it off, I do think it would be just a really freeing experience.
I feel like there has to be some kind of happy medium.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot more difficult. I mean, like you said, you're not going to Taco Bell for dinner. You're eating tomatoes.
There's no DoorDash in the
onions
remote
from your garden.
Yeah, of course. Or your chickens that you have raised since little baby chicks. But yeah.
So in 1989, not that long ago, we're not going
right before we were born.
Far back. Yeah, right before we were born, 1989. Randy sold 2 sawed-off shotguns to an undercover ATF informant. Now, that move landed him in hot water with the feds, and rather than cooperate or snitch, Weaver refused to appear in court. So a bench warrant was issued, and that triggered a series of miscommunications and missteps that would eventually lead to tragedy.
By 1992, the Weavers had been holed up in their Ruby Ridge cabin for months. The U.S. Marshals were keeping tabs on them from a distance, waiting for the right time to arrest Randy without putting agents or the family members in danger.
Okay, so just a really quick rewind here. He was selling some guns that, technically you're not allowed to own or sell sawed-off shotguns. And they basically presented him with an opportunity. You can kind of come on to our side and be a rat, or you can not help us. Thus, we're going to pursue you further. And he mentioned the documentary. If he would have just accepted the offer, none of this would have happened, for what it's worth. But you know how it is. People are hesitant, especially when you're anti-government. When you're someone who's moving off the grid, probably going to be a lot less likely to help the government. On August 21st, 1992, this is when things took a deadly turn. 6 U.S. Marshals conducted a recon mission around the property, and they encountered Randy's son Samuel, just 14 years old, and, we must make mention, the family dog.
And then a gunfight broke out. The dog was unfortunately shot.
R.I.P. to the dog. We hate to hear that on a show.
Yep. And Sammy, remember, just 14 years old at the time.
14, just literally saw his dog get shot right in front of him.
Yep. And scared, returned fire and ran, but was gunned down in the back as he fled. A U.S. Marshal, William Deegan, was also killed in the shootout.
So just to put ourselves in that position, again, it's, this is the way you're raised. You're 14, like you said. There's a stranger on your property, first and foremost, when you're off the grid and you have property that you own. Gun owners, you're not really allowed to be on the property. Fire first, ask questions later. So you see your dog get gunned down. Naturally, you're going to fire back. I thought it was interesting because he got shot in the back, which is a huge no-no, as you know. If someone were to break into your home, you are legally allowed to fire, but if they turn around and run and you shoot them in the back.
Yeah, because you have the right to defend yourself, but obviously somebody that's running away from you.
Yeah.
You don't need defense from.
Yeah,
so
you're not legally allowed to fire upon someone that's actively trying to flee from you.
Which I feel like should be the same
for the government.
rules for the government.
Absolutely. Yeah, especially towards a 14-year-old child.
Yeah. And his poor dog.
And his dog. Okay, so you can see right away tensions are boiling for sure. So this single encounter escalated everything. The next day, the FBI's hostage rescue team was deployed. And once it pops off, there's no turnaround. So you have snipers positioned around the cabin. The rules of engagement were controversial. Basically, shoot on sight if any adult male was armed.
And that probably came a little bit from the marshal.
Sure.
That was killed in
the shootout,
yeah. I'm guessing.
Yeah, when you lose one of your own, it's a brotherhood for sure, understandably. So, I get it, the rules of engagement. And this is 1989. Again, also, keep in mind we don't have cell phones, we don't have drones. It's a little bit of a different world back then, for sure.
So on August 22nd, FBI sniper Lon Horiuchi fired at Randy Weaver, hitting him in the arm. Then, as Vicky Weaver stood in the cabin doorway holding their 10-month-old daughter, she was shot in the head and killed instantly.
Obviously, it continues to get crazier and crazier. So we have a 14-year-old boy shot in the back running away. Huge no-no. And, so Randy's shot, and the wife, she's like, hey, she's yelling for everyone to come back in. Standing at the door, holding 10-month-old Alicia, and not armed. Unless you're counting an infant as being armed. I guess she could have threw the baby as a weapon. Mm-hmm. But yeah, not armed, and headshot. Yeah. Maybe you could tell me, maybe they shot her in the leg and knocked her down, not headshot. Yeah. Headshot, killed instantly. So her death sent shockwaves not just across Idaho, across the country. The standoff continued for 11 days, national media swarming, and protesters gathering outside government buildings, demanding accountability.
So after the deaths of both Sammy and Vicky Weaver, the FBI was under immense pressure. Protesters started camping outside of the area. The media was calling it a siege. And inside of the cabin, a grieving family and a wounded Randy.
Tensions sky high. The standoff dragged on for 11 days. Eventually, negotiators were able to convince Weaver to surrender with the help of Bo Gritz, who was also a former Green Beret and far-right figure who Weaver trusted.
Weaver and family friend Kevin Harris, who was also in the cabin, had been involved in the shootout, were taken into custody. The entire country watched it unfold like a real-life tragedy. Part survivalist tale, part government cautionary tale.
All right, so here's where things get even more intense. I'd say intense, bizarre. In court, Randy Weaver was only found guilty of failing to appear and violating bail conditions. He was not guilty on the firearms charges, which is why this whole thing started from the beginning, and not guilty for the deaths. Now, his friend Kevin Harris, oddly enough, also acquitted of all charges, including the killing of the U.S. Marshal.
And remember, the U.S. government killed Vicky Weaver, a mother holding her baby, only
unarmed.
10 months old at the time and completely unarmed, and a 14-year-old kid. In the back, running away. Public opinion quickly turned. Even people who didn't support Weaver's beliefs agreed the feds had gone way too far this time.
Yeah, and I think this is a good moment to pause. We on this show, we love to walk the line. We don't really necessarily want to take sides per se, but in America, what makes this country great is that we are free. You have a right to own firearms. And he was selling sawed-off shotguns, which is illegal, but he was found not guilty. So
Yeah.
there's that. And
The
then,
innocent until proven guilty was not here, I think.
yeah. And there was a lot of conspiracies because he was a far right white supremacist. And whether you feel like that's good, bad, at the end of the day, as an American, you have a right to freedom of religion. You can believe in whatever you want as long as you're not harming others. So there's a lot of people in America, as we'll learn towards the end of this episode, going into the next episode, it really shifted people's feelings towards the government because we are supposed to be this free country, maybe not as much as we once thought. The government eventually paid $3.1 million to the surviving Weaver children in a wrongful death settlement, but no federal agents were ever criminally charged. The rules of engagement used by the FBI heavily criticized in Senate hearings and by watchdog groups.
Weaver himself said it best after the fact. They killed my son, they killed my wife, and no one was ever punished for it.
And for Sarah Weaver, the oldest, just 16 years old when it happened, she later described her mom as her protector and her best friend. They didn't just take my mother, they took the heart of our family.
The outrage spread beyond Ruby Ridge. During the Senate hearings that followed, U.S. Senator Arlen Specter said, "This was a tragedy that did not have to happen. It is a textbook example of how miscommunication and overreach can turn into catastrophe."
The DOJ's own report called it out directly. The loss of life at Ruby Ridge was unnecessary. The rules of engagement used by the FBI were unconstitutional and seriously flawed.
And outside of the courthouses, protest signs read, "If this is what happens to a family that just wants to be left alone, what does that say about freedom in America?"
Ruby Ridge became fuel for anti-government movements, militia recruitment, conspiracy theorists, and eventually terrorism. And this is kind of going to lead us into next week's episode. Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber, he would later say that the Ruby Ridge helped radicalize him.
And you don't have to agree with the Weavers' worldview to see that it was a catastrophic failure on every level. It wasn't just deadly, it was avoidable.
The government's put in place, and they want to help stop things such as anti-government movements, militia, conspiracies, but in doing all this, it actually reinforced it, really brought it out of the woodwork. You had these people that were off the grid, doing their own thing. Don't mess with me, I won't mess with you. Well, you mess with them, and now it's in return causing them to return fire, basically, such as the Waco incident at Texas, the Oklahoma City bombing. So, yeah, this was a really big deal. I think the most interesting thing of all, you had the son and the mom who were murdered. You had the U.S. Marshal who was murdered. But neither party was found guilty of any of the crimes. I just thought that was really weird. And the pain it caused, it didn't end when the standoff did. Years later, Sarah Weaver said, 4 years I lived in fear, anxiety, and anger. But I had to let it go to live. I had to forgive to move forward.
And that's powerful, because even after all of that loss, she found a way out of the darkness. And maybe that's the part of Ruby Ridge we don't talk about enough, the aftermath, the healing, and the very human cost. Ruby Ridge became a turning point in America, fueling the rise of anti-government movements in the 90s.
So it's one of those cases that really lives in the gray zone. Again, you don't have to agree with Randy Weaver's views or his actions. I mean, you could disagree with him 100%. That's perfectly fine. But nonetheless, you can definitely understand that what happened at Ruby Ridge was a failure on multiple levels. Law enforcement, communication, justice. It honestly just broke down everywhere.
And in the end, 3 people died. A 14-year-old boy, a mother, and a U.S. Marshal. All preventable deaths. All from one bad decision that spiraled way out of control.
It's not just a case of violence, it's a case of escalation, of fear, distrust, and what happens when people simply just stop listening to each other.
So when we look at Ruby Ridge now, over 30 years later, it's hard not to see it as a little bit of a warning about the dangers of mistrust, yes, but also about what happens when both sides stop talking and start treating each other like enemies.
Yeah, this wasn't just a remote family with fringe beliefs, and it wasn't just the feds doing their job. It was honestly a pressure cooker of paranoia, bad intel, and genuinely zero accountability until lives had already been lost.
And the fact that it laid the groundwork for so many future anti-government movements, that's pretty heavy. Ruby Ridge didn't just end with a surrender. It echoed through Oklahoma City, through Waco, and right into the heart of modern extremists.
If there's one takeaway from Ruby Ridge for me personally, it's this. Escalation doesn't just cost lives in the moment. It builds narratives. Narratives that spiral into more fear, more violence, and even more division, which we are experiencing more now than ever probably in this country. So 30 years later, I feel like we're still experiencing all those sorts of issues right now.
And like you said, maybe the scariest thing is that it could happen again. And maybe in a different place, under different circumstances, unless we truly learn something from it.
I mean, let's hope that we do things like this, stories like this. You hope that we can learn from it, take something from it, but as we know, history always has a way of repeating itself. So that's Idaho, a state of dramatic landscapes and even more dramatic true crime. We had the volcanic plains to towering waterfalls. It's a place where beauty and darkness collide.
We covered famous falls, potato museums, and crater hikes. But we also talked about two cases that shook the nation: the brutal college murders in Moscow and deadly standoff at Ruby Ridge.
Now, Idaho may seem like quiet country, but if this episode taught us anything, it's that silence doesn't always mean safety.
All right, AJ, you know what time it is. I have my state sheet, I have my vibes, and I'm ready to rank Idaho.
All right, so let's do it. Based solely on the information you've learned today. Zero influence from geography, logic, or actual experience. So you've never been to Idaho before, correct?
Nope.
Okay, I will say this. I actually have been to Idaho before.
Really?
I have. I spent a day in Idaho. That's when we did our out west RV trip.
Oh, yeah.
We were in Yellowstone. Yellowstone, there's a sliver that's in Idaho. And we actually went through like the west exit and didn't even realize it till we kind of like pulled up our GPS and realized like we were actually in Idaho for the day. Now, again, I know we've said in the past like you have to stay overnight for it to count. We didn't stay overnight. Not saying I'm checking it off my list, but I have been to Idaho nonetheless. So zero experience for you personally. A little bit for me, just a couple hours. I want to know, where does Idaho land on your travel desirability ranking?
Okay. So factoring in the gorgeous nature, I love that Shoshone Falls. I think that'd be amazing to see.
It looks really pretty. And
it really does.
I can't believe I've never heard of it before.
I know. I didn't either until
Always
we did this
hear of
episode.
Niagara Falls. Never heard of this
Yeah,
one.
and this being, what did I say, taller?
Yeah, even
That's
bigger.
crazy.
Yeah.
But also the creepy, like, cultish energy. And honestly, how likely I am to get murdered in a cabin. I'm gonna put Idaho at
Drum roll. Number
37.
Ooh, 37.
I will say, before us having this, I was thinking it was even gonna maybe be lower, but
Okay.
I think we might have talked it up a little bit.
Okay, maybe we bumped it up a little bit.
And honestly, I could definitely go for some fries right now.
I was going to say, do you think...
I love fries and potatoes, so...
So, I've been to Georgia a couple of times. Been to the Coca-Cola factory. It's a fact. Coca-Cola just tastes better when you're in Atlanta. Do you think French fries just taste better in Idaho? They have to, right?
I would assume, because
They
it's
got to.
illegal to sell a...
True.
What do they say, damaged or...
Yeah, you're getting a French fry straight from the source.
Yes.
Got to be better.
Exactly. So I think that'd be awesome. I think Yeah, have you seen like on TikTok those little potato flights?
Yes.
I want to do one of those so bad. We should start having like a snack for
We
every
should. That
episode.
would be cool.
That'd be cool. Maybe season 3. You never
Okay.
know, guys.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right, 37, not bad for a state you've never been to. You know, not a whole lot of experience. I didn't know a whole lot about Idaho prior to researching this, but you know, we have a floating golf green, which I would love to try out. And as tragic as it is, I think the story of Ruby Ridge is very impactful in the history of our country.
Yep, and I like my states with a little mystery. And honestly, some lava fields never hurt. And definitely not any french fries have ever hurt.
All right, everyone, that's going to be a wrap on state number 30. Join us next week as we head to state number 31, and you already know there's more murder waiting for us.
Be sure to follow and subscribe. You can listen along on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. Please also find us on TikTok and Instagram at 50 States, 50 Murders. Until then, lock your doors and run that background check on your neighbors.
And remember that every state has a dark side.